In the sweltering heat of the plantation, the sun blazed mercilessly over the barren earth. The fields stretched endlessly, each row of crops a reminder of the relentless labor imposed upon those who had no choice but to obey. Among them stood a man, his skin dark as polished mahogany, muscles taut and defined. Yet every sinew seemed pulled by a weight invisible yet suffocating. His hair was cropped short, nearly shaved against the scalp, revealing the stark contours of his head and the raw lines of his skull beneath. His eyes, sharp and piercing, betrayed the storm within a tempest of fear, pain, and the unyielding pressure to survive. He was known only as Pata Seca among the others, a name whispered in trembling voices because it meant dry foot, a cruel jest at his tireless march through suffering. He had arrived at the plantation not long ago, torn from the homeland he barely remembered and thrust into a world defined by chains and commands. The metal around his wrists clinked softly whenever he moved, a constant gnawing reminder of the freedom stolen from him. The chains were light in weight but heavy in symbolism, binding not only his body but his spirit, tethering him to a fate he had not chosen. Each morning, he awoke before the sun, the coarse straw of the hut cutting into his skin, the scent of sweat and despair hanging thick in the air. His first thoughts were never of comfort or hope, they were survival. How to endure another day under the watchful eyes of the overseers, how to suppress the panic that threatened to consume him, how to keep his mind from fracturing beneath the relentless oppression. The other slaves moved silently around him, their own burdens reflected in hollow eyes and stooped shoulders. Yet Pata Seca's frame towered above most, a testament to strength that even the cruel hand of fate could not fully diminish. Despite his imposing physique, his movements were careful, measured, every step calculated. He had learned quickly that brute strength alone did not guarantee survival. The overseers, men drunk on authority and cruelty, were quick to punish any hint of defiance. A misstep, a flicker of resentment, and the whip would crack, slicing through the humid air, leaving marks that burned far deeper than skin. Pata Seca had felt it already, dozens of lashes across his back, each strike a punctuation of pain, each scar a map of endurance. And yet, he survived, always, for the cruelest of reasons. The morning ritual began with a harsh bell, its clang reverberating across the plantation like a judgment. Pata Seca rose, shoulders tense, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He moved to the edge of the hut, where the light of dawn struck the ground, illuminating the dust that clung stubbornly to every surface. His gaze swept over the fields, over the other slaves already in motion, over the guards whose eyes gleamed with malice. The metal around his wrists caught the sunlight, glinting with a cold promise of the day's trials. Pata Seca knew what was expected of him. Beyond the endless labor, beyond the blistering heat and the unceasing orders, there was another duty, one far more invasive and dehumanizing. He had been chosen, for reasons he would never comprehend, to serve a role that stripped him of identity, of autonomy, of dignity. He was to breed, to produce life not for himself but for the whims of his captors, to ensure the continuance of their twisted legacy. Each encounter was a violation, yet he endured, each time steel and flesh and will forced into compliance. The thought of resistance brought a bitter taste to his mouth. The cost was always too high, the consequences too cruel. As he stepped into the field, his body moved with a grim rhythm, each motion precise, each muscle responding with trained efficiency. He was a living instrument, honed by necessity, yet burdened by a soul fraying at the edges. The overseers watched closely, their eyes hawk-like, ready to pounce on any hesitation. Pata Seca met each gaze with the mask of composure, though beneath the surface, anxiety churned like a stormy sea. Every glance, every command, every passing day reinforced the prison, built not of walls, but of fear and expectation, even in the rare moments of quiet. When the sun dipped low and the fields emptied, Pata Seca's mind did not rest. The memories of home haunted him, images of a life stolen, a family left behind, a freedom he would never reclaim. He remembered the laughter of his siblings, the feel of soft earth beneath bare feet, the warmth of the sun untainted by shackles. Now those memories were fragile things flickering in the corners of his mind, fleeting and painful reminders of what he had lost. The other slaves respected him silently, some out of awe, others out of fear. He carried himself differently, not merely a man, but a figure defined by survival and suffering intertwined. Yet Pata Seca did not seek respect. He sought only the endurance of another day, the chance to rise with the sun and breathe, to move through the chains and lashes and demands without breaking entirely. There was a calculus to his existence, a delicate balance between compliance and the preservation of self, and he walked that line with painstaking care. By midday, the sun beat down with unrelenting ferocity. Sweat ran freely, clinging to dark skin, dripping from jaw and neck onto soil hardened by neglect. His muscles strained, yet he moved with a controlled grace, a careful management of strength so as not to draw the ire of those who wielded whips and commands. Pata Seca had learned to measure pain, to anticipate cruelty, to endure with precision. It was a survival skill born of necessity, yet it carved deep lines of tension into his body and face. In the evenings, when the fields were abandoned and the overseers retreated to their quarters, he would sit alone, the chains heavy in his lap, eyes cast downward. He did not cry, there was no room for such displays, but his mind wandered to what could have been. Each day was an echo of the last, each night a mirror of relentless captivity. And yet, in the shadows of despair, a sliver of defiance lingered, fragile but persistent. Pata Seca understood that hope could be dangerous, but the mind, even shackled, sought it in secret corners. The chapter of his life had begun violently, a rupture from freedom to bondage, from identity to objectification. Yet even within this harrowing existence, Pata Seca moved forward, a man defined by the contradiction of immense physical power restrained by the chains of circumstance. He was a symbol of endurance, of suffering endured silently, a testament to the human capacity to withstand cruelty when survival demanded it. And though the days stretched endlessly and the demands became ever more invasive, he remained a figure of shadowed strength in a world determined to break him. The sun finally sank below the horizon, leaving the plantation bathed in the muted glow of dusk. Pata Seca, chained yet unbroken, lifted his gaze toward the fading light. His eyes, sharp and wary, reflected the burning embers of a resilience that had yet to be extinguished. The world around him remained harsh, cruel, and unrelenting. But within the contours of his strong frame and determined expression, there lingered a quiet assertion: survival, no matter the cost, was his alone to claim. And so, as night enveloped the fields and the stars blinked faintly above, Pata Seca prepared himself to face another day, another trial, another invasion of the body and soul. The chains were heavy, the overseers merciless, and the duties abhorrent, but he was alive. That alone was a victory, precarious yet undeniable, and it would carry him through the darkness until the next sunrise. The sun rose again, unforgiving and glaring, casting long shadows over the plantation. Pata Seca awoke to the metallic rattle of his chains, the sound a harsh reminder that freedom was a word he had long since forgotten. The hut was sweltering, the air heavy with the mingling sense of sweat, dust, and despair. He flexed his wrists inside the iron cuffs, muscles tense and defined, the veins along his arms like taut cords of steel. His face was sharp and focused, eyes narrowing as he anticipated the arrival of the overseers. No words were spoken. They never needed to be. The routine was drilled into every bone and muscle of the men and women who labored here. Pata Seca stepped into the open yard, bare-chested, the chains weighing on him, his short hair gleaming in the early light. He scanned the perimeter, alert to any motion, any hint of approaching danger. His gaze, severe and piercing, betrayed the constant pressure of obedience demanded by men who wielded authority with cruelty as their language. Orders came swiftly, shouted across the fields by overseers perched on raised platforms. Pata Seca moved with calculated precision, bending and stooping to tend the crops, each motion choreographed by necessity. The sweat glistened on his skin, highlighting the taut musculature of his back and arms, yet there was no pride in his strength, only survival. Every crack of the whip that struck another slave reinforced the lessons he had already learned. Speed, precision, and the careful concealment of fear. By mid-morning, the day's labor intensified. Pata Seca was tasked with repairing broken irrigation channels, a job that demanded both brute force and meticulous attention. He hoisted heavy stones and carved new paths for water, the chains around his wrists clinking with each exertion. His eyes darted constantly, reading the subtle movements of guards, aware that even a moment's lapse could be catastrophic. The overseer's presence was omnipresent, like vultures circling above, ready to punish any sign of resistance or exhaustion. At noon, the heat became unbearable. Pata Seca's breath came in measured bursts, his body strained yet enduring. The other slaves paused briefly, exchanging glances of shared suffering, while he remained vigilant. He had learned the silent art of observation, noticing which overseers were quick to anger, which guards were distracted, which moments offered the slimmest reprieve. His sharp face, framed by short-cropped hair, reflected a mind always at work, calculating survival even under the weight of his own pain and fatigue. Later in the afternoon, the overseers summoned him for a task far more invasive than labor. He was to fulfill the cruelest duty assigned to him, one that stripped him of any remaining privacy, identity, or dignity. Pata Seca complied, moving with a controlled rigidity, eyes sharp yet veiled with resignation. Though his body was strong, each act was a reminder of how force had replaced freedom, how control had been wrested from him with precision and cruelty. Even the briefest pause, the smallest gesture of defiance, would have earned immediate retribution. When he returned to the fields, the sun had begun its slow descent. The golden light illuminated the dust that hung in the air, highlighting the outline of his muscular frame, taut and restrained, chains dangling at his wrists. His eyes swept across the horizon, sharp and calculating, searching for any sign of danger or reprieve. Despite exhaustion, there was no surrender in his posture, only the subtle, unyielding assertion of endurance. Evening brought no real respite. The slaves gathered water, tended to injuries, and whispered among themselves, but Pata Seca found no comfort. His sharp face, framed by the near-shaved hair, betrayed tension and worry as he considered what the next day would demand. Each night, he revisited memories of home and freedom, fragile illusions that he dared not allow to bloom too brightly. Hope was a luxury in a world defined by chains and surveillance, but he nurtured it quietly, as one might nurture a tiny flame in a storm. Night settled over the plantation, stars emerging slowly in the dark sky. Pata Seca sat by the edge of the field, chains heavy on his wrists, body still and vigilant. The wind stirred the dust, rustling through the barren crops, and he allowed himself a single moment to exhale, the sharpness of his gaze softening only slightly. He knew the morrow would bring the same relentless orders, the same invasive duties, the same testing of endurance. Yet in this small reprieve, he silently affirmed one fact: he had survived. And survival was the quiet, unspoken rebellion he carried within himself. The air was thick with heat and dust, curling around every motion in the plantation as Pata Seca stepped once more into the field. His chains jingled softly, a constant reminder that each movement carried weight far beyond the physical. Short hair clung to his scalp with sweat, muscles taut yet controlled, eyes sharp and wary. The sun bore down mercilessly, painting the dust in a golden haze. And yet he moved with precision, knowing that every misstep could invite punishment. Today, the overseers had imposed a new task, clearing a swath of tangled underbrush that threatened to overtake the young crops. Pata Seca knelt among the thick roots, hands bound yet dexterous, slicing through vines with sharp tools provided grudgingly by a guard. His body, though strong, bore the tension of continuous strain. Veins stood out across arms and neck, a map of endurance written in muscle and sweat. His gaze darted to the edges of the plantation, where the overseer's shadowed figures watched like predators. Every so often, he paused, momentarily catching sight of another enslaved worker struggling under the weight of labor. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication, a flicker of shared suffering. Pata Seca's sharp features softened ever so slightly, though only enough to acknowledge understanding without drawing notice. Even in captivity, these tiny exchanges reminded him that he was not alone, that survival was not solely about endurance, but also about the faintest traces of human connection. Midday brought no relief. Overseers circled like vultures, eyes sharp for any sign of hesitation. One step closer, barked an order, and Pata Seca's response was immediate, a mix of practiced obedience and internal calculation. Each motion was precise, lifting a heavy log, bending low, swinging an axe. Chains rattled with every exertion, a cruel accompaniment to the rhythm of toil. And yet, in the midst of physical strain, his mind worked tirelessly, mapping out small ways to preserve energy, reduce punishment, and retain a fragment of agency in a world designed to strip it away. By afternoon, a sudden incident broke the monotony. A cart laden with supplies overturned near the main path, and the overseer's yells pierced the air. Pata Seca reacted instinctively, rushing to help lift the heavy beams while keeping within the exacting boundaries of compliance. His body, though forced into servitude, was a marvel of strength, muscles coiled and released in perfect coordination. Short hair plastered to his head, face taut and focused. Eyes darting toward the overseers to gauge reactions, he worked silently. Yet his every move was a negotiation between survival and defiance. The chaos drew attention, and for a fleeting moment, Pata Seca allowed his sharp eyes to scan the plantation beyond immediate duty. He saw corners of shadow where work could pause unnoticed, spots where the overseer's gaze faltered. Though brief, these moments of awareness nurtured a spark of silent defiance. He could not rebel openly, the cost was far too high, but in subtle movements, in the careful allocation of effort, he maintained a quiet claim to his own will. Evening descended slowly, casting long shadows across the fields. Pata Seca paused to catch his breath, the chains heavy and cold against his wrists, muscles trembling from exertion. Sweat and dust coated every inch of skin, yet his posture remained resolute. His gaze fixed on the horizon, eyes sharp and calculating. And though exhaustion tugged at every fiber of his being, there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of inner strength refusing to break entirely. Night fell, and with it, a brief reprieve. Pata Seca retreated to the small hut he shared with others, the chain still clinking softly, marking the boundaries of captivity. Here, in the dim flicker of lantern light, he allowed himself a small act of care, checking minor cuts and bruises, drinking sparingly from a communal water bucket, and studying the lines of his own reflection in a polished fragment of metal. Short hair framed a sharp, tense face, eyes weary yet vigilant. In these private moments, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had been taken, and the faint stirrings of what might yet endure. Hope, endurance, and a mind unbroken. As the night deepened, Pata Seca lay down on the coarse straw, chains looping loosely but ever present. His gaze shifted toward the window, where moonlight danced on dust motes, illuminating the stark angles of his muscles and the tension etched across his face. Each breath was measured, each heartbeat a quiet defiance against a system designed to crush both body and soul. Though tomorrow would bring renewed toil, invasive duties, and relentless oversight, He held within himself a resilient truth. Survival was not merely endurance, it was the act of retaining selfhood, even when every external force demanded surrender. And so, beneath the heavy stars and the oppressive silence of night, Pata Seca rested with vigilance, the chains around his wrists a constant reminder, yet also a testament. He was alive, aware, and quietly asserting a power that no overseer could fully claim, the power to endure, to witness, and to survive. The dawn broke quietly over the plantation, casting pale light across the fields already bustling with labor. Pata Seca rose, chains rattling softly as he stretched his vassal body. Short hair plastered to his head with sweat and dust, muscles taut under the thin layer of grime. His sharp face bore the tension of endless vigilance. Each morning carried the same relentless weight, the unyielding labor, the constant observation, the knowledge that a single misstep could result in immediate punishment. Today's assignment was clearing the northern section of the fields, where weeds had grown thick and wild, threatening the delicate crops. Pata Seca moved among the overgrowth, wrists shackled, every motion precise yet strained. The veins along his arms and neck stood out like cords of iron as he pushed, pulled, and lifted. Though he was strong, the work sapped every ounce of energy, and yet he endured, eyes scanning constantly for the overseer's shadowed forms. Mid-morning brought the crack of the whip. One of the younger slaves faltered, and the overseer's anger was immediate. Pata Seca stiffened, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, muscles coiled as he anticipated what would come. Though the punishment was not his, the lesson was clear. Hesitation was lethal. He continued working, every movement a careful balance between exertion and restraint. The chains at his wrists, a constant, cold reminder of his bondage. As he labored, a faint breeze stirred the air, carrying dust and the scent of dry earth. For a brief moment, Pata Seca allowed his mind to wander, not to freedom, for that was a dangerous indulgence, but to strategy. He considered how to conserve strength, how to avoid attracting the overseer's attention, how to maintain the faintest semblance of control over a body that was no longer entirely his own. These were small victories, private and invisible, yet they bolstered his spirit under siege. By noon, the sun bore down mercilessly. Sweat soaked every inch of his skin, chains pressing uncomfortably against raw flesh. Pata Seca paused briefly to adjust them, wincing as the metal bit into his wrists. His short-cropped hair stuck in glistening strands, his sharp features hardened with focus and fatigue. Around him, the field stretched endlessly, a tapestry of toil and oppression, and he moved through it like a predator in disguise, alert to every movement, every glint of metal, every shift of shadow. Later in the afternoon, the overseers demanded more than labor. Pata Seca was summoned to the central compound, a place where the cruelest orders were executed. His chains clinked ominously with each step, the sound loud in the stillness. Muscles tense and eyes sharp, he obeyed without hesitation, for disobedience was a luxury forbidden by the ruthless system surrounding him. Though the task was invasive and dehumanizing, he approached it with a grim precision, allowing only the bare minimum of emotion to surface on his severe face. The return to the fields was no relief. Pata Seca moved among the other slaves, his frame towering yet restrained, muscles flexing under the strain of the day's labor. His gaze swept constantly, noting every potential threat, every opportunity for minor reprieve. Even in captivity, even under chains and whips, he maintained a quiet command over his own endurance, a private assertion of will that could not be taken by force. As evening descended, a rare quiet settled over the plantation. Pata Seca leaned against a tree, chains heavy at his wrists, muscles trembling from exertion, short hair damp and clinging. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, alert even in the fading light. For the first time that day, he allowed a hint of reflection, acknowledging both the horrors he had endured and the strength he still possessed. Survival, he realized, was an act of defiance carried out silently. Day by day. Night brought darkness and shadows, but also the faintest sliver of solace. Pata Seca lay upon coarse straw, chains looped around his wrists, but not restraining the mind that had grown sharper through adversity. His gaze fixed on a small opening where moonlight touched the hut floor, highlighting the taut curves of his muscles and the tension etched across his face. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of fleeting freedom, yet even in rest, his mind remained vigilant. The plantation's weight was heavy, but he carried it with measured, unbroken strength. And so, beneath the silent stars, Pata Seca endured. Each chain, each lash, each relentless order was met with controlled strength, mental acuity, and a quiet defiance that the overseers could never see. He was alive. He was aware. And within the darkest shadows of the plantation, he claimed what little autonomy remained, the power to observe, endure, and resist silently. Day after grueling day, the morning air was thick with the smell of dry earth and sweat. Pata Seca rose, chains rattling softly as he flexed his muscular arms, short hair damp from the night's rest. Every inch of his body was taut with tension, each movement measured and deliberate. He glanced around at the other enslaved workers, their faces etched with fatigue and despair, and then focused on his own task, clearing a path to the southern edge of the plantation, where new seedlings were planted. As he stepped into the field, the overseer's eyes followed, sharp and unyielding. Pata Seca adjusted the weight of the chains on his wrists, feeling the cold bite of iron against skin already raw from labor. Each movement, lifting, bending, pulling, was a testament to both strength and restraint. He moved with precision, aware that any misstep could lead to immediate punishment. And yet his mind wandered, calculating small ways to preserve energy and maintain agency within his constrained body. The task demanded both physical power and careful attention. Tangled vines and thick roots resisted his every effort, forcing him to engage every muscle while keeping his expression composed. Sweat dripped down his short-cropped hair, along his sharp face, and onto the dust-covered earth. Even in chains, he carried himself with a latent power. Muscles coiled and ready, eyes alert for the slightest hint of danger from the overseers or the natural hazards of the plantation. By mid-morning, a sudden shout broke the monotony. One of the overseers had spotted a gap in the workers' alignment and ordered Pata Seca to retrieve a fallen tool from the far side of the field. He moved swiftly, chains clinking, body tense and coiled like a spring. Short hair plastered to his scalp, his sharp eyes scanning constantly. He navigated the dusty terrain with a careful blend of speed and control. The weight of the chains did not slow him. It reminded him of every boundary, every rule imposed by those who sought to dominate. As he returned, he noticed a small moment of shared glance with another enslaved man, a fleeting recognition of resilience and survival. Pata Seca's sharp features softened briefly in acknowledgement, a silent camaraderie forged under oppression. Yet there was no room for indulgence. The overseer's gaze was ever present, waiting to punish any lapse in diligence or obedience. By afternoon, the sun scorched the fields relentlessly. Pata Seca's sweat-soaked skin glistened, muscles taut with exhaustion, yet refusing to give in. His task now shifted to carrying water to the farthest reaches of the plantation, each bucket heavy and cumbersome. Chains clanged with every movement, a metallic rhythm that accompanied the laborious beat of his heart. His short-cropped hair clung to his head, sharp face tight with tension, eyes focused on each careful step. Survival demanded unbroken attention. His mind worked tirelessly to anticipate every potential hazard. Later, he was summoned once again to the central compound, where the most invasive duties awaited. He obeyed without hesitation, muscles flexed, eyes sharp and alert, chains jingling as he moved. Every step was a negotiation between obedience and private defiance. a careful assertion of the control he could still maintain over his own body and mind. Though dehumanized, Pata Seca retained an inner vigilance, a quiet power that could not be stripped away. Evening brought a brief respite as shadows stretched across the dusty fields. Pata Seca paused, chains heavy at his wrists, muscles trembling but still taut. He observed the plantation with keen eyes, noting the positions of overseers, the movements of fellow workers, and the faint patches of cover where one could momentarily rest without being seen. His short-cropped hair reflected the fading sunlight, sharp features softened only by exhaustion. Though the day had been punishing, he had endured. Night settled with a cool hush. Pata Seca lay upon coarse straw, chains loosely looped around his wrists, body coated in dust and sweat. Eyes sharp, he observed the moonlight filtering through the hut, illuminating the powerful lines of his muscles and the tension still etched across his face. Sleep was fragmented, but within it, he nurtured a quiet defiance, the certainty that survival itself was an act of rebellion. The plantation could dominate his body, dictate his movements, and strip him of liberty. Yet his mind, his resolve, remained intact. And so, beneath the stars, Pata Seca rested with vigilance, the chains a constant reminder of oppression, yet also a testament to the hidden strength within. Each day was a challenge, each task an assertion of endurance, and each breath a quiet act of defiance in a world designed to strip him of both. The morning air was thick with the smell of dry earth and sweat. Pata Seca rose, chains rattling softly as he flexed his muscular arms, short hair damp from the night's rest. Every inch of his body was taut with tension, each movement measured and deliberate. He glanced around at the other enslaved workers, their faces etched with fatigue and despair, and then focused on his own task, clearing a path to the southern edge of the plantation, where new seedlings were planted. As he stepped into the field, the overseer's eyes followed, sharp and unyielding. Pata Seca adjusted the weight of the chains on his wrists, feeling the cold bite of iron against skin already raw from labor. Each movement, lifting, bending, pulling, was a testament to both strength and restraint. He moved with precision, aware that any misstep could lead to immediate punishment. And yet his mind wandered, calculating small ways to preserve energy and maintain agency within his constrained body. The task demanded both physical power and careful attention. Tangled vines and thick roots resisted his every effort, forcing him to engage every muscle while keeping his expression composed. Sweat dripped down his short-cropped hair, along his sharp face, and onto the dust-covered earth. Even in chains, he carried himself with a latent power. Muscles coiled and ready, eyes alert for the slightest hint of danger from the overseers or the natural hazards of the plantation. By mid-morning, a sudden shout broke the monotony. One of the overseers had spotted a gap in the workers' alignment and ordered Pata Seca to retrieve a fallen tool from the far side of the field. He moved swiftly, chains clinking, body tense and coiled like a spring. Short hair plastered to his scalp, his sharp eyes scanning constantly. He navigated the dusty terrain with a careful blend of speed and control. The weight of the chains did not slow him. It reminded him of every boundary, every rule imposed by those who sought to dominate. As he returned, he noticed a small moment of shared glance with another enslaved man, a fleeting recognition of resilience and survival. Pata Seca's sharp features softened briefly in acknowledgement, a silent camaraderie forged under oppression. Yet there was no room for indulgence. The overseer's gaze was ever present, waiting to punish any lapse in diligence or obedience. By afternoon, the sun scorched the fields relentlessly. Pata Seca's sweat-soaked skin glistened, muscles taut with exhaustion yet refusing to give in. His task now shifted to carrying water to the farthest reaches of the plantation, each bucket heavy and cumbersome. Chains clanged with every movement, a metallic rhythm that accompanied the laborious beat of his heart. His short-cropped hair clung to his head, sharp face tight with tension, eyes focused on each careful step. Survival demanded unbroken attention. His mind worked tirelessly to anticipate every potential hazard. Later, he was summoned once again to the central compound, where the most invasive duties awaited. He obeyed without hesitation, muscles flexed, eyes sharp and alert, chains jingling as he moved. Every step was a negotiation between obedience and private defiance, a careful assertion of the control he could still maintain over his own body and mind. Though dehumanized, Pata Seca retained an inner vigilance, a quiet power that could not be stripped away. Evening brought a brief respite as shadows stretched across the dusty fields. Pata Seca paused, chains heavy at his wrists, muscles trembling but still taut. He observed the plantation with keen eyes, noting the positions of overseers, the movements of fellow workers, and the faint patches of cover where one could momentarily rest without being seen. His short-cropped hair reflected the fading sunlight, sharp features softened only by exhaustion. Though the day had been punishing, he had endured. Night settled with a cool hush. Pata Seca lay upon coarse straw, chains loosely looped around his wrists, body coated in dust and sweat. Eyes sharp, he observed the moonlight filtering through the hut, illuminating the powerful lines of his muscles and the tension still etched across his face. Sleep was fragmented, but within it, he nurtured a quiet defiance, the certainty that survival itself was an act of rebellion. The plantation could dominate his body, dictate his movements, and strip him of liberty. Yet his mind, his resolve, remained intact. And so, beneath the stars, Pata Seca rested with vigilance, the chains a constant reminder of oppression, yet also a testament to the hidden strength within. Each day was a challenge, each task an assertion of endurance, and each breath a quiet act of defiance in a world designed to strip him of both. The morning air was thick with the smell of dry earth and sweat. Pata Seca rose, chains rattling softly as he flexed his muscular arms, short hair damp from the night's rest. Every inch of his body was taut with tension, each movement measured and deliberate. He glanced around at the other enslaved workers, their faces etched with fatigue and despair, and then focused on his own task, clearing a path to the southern edge of the plantation, where new seedlings were planted. As he stepped into the field, the overseer's eyes followed, sharp and unyielding. Pata Seca adjusted the weight of the chains on his wrists, feeling the cold bite of iron against skin already raw from labor. Each movement, lifting, bending, pulling, was a testament to both strength and restraint. He moved with precision, aware that any misstep could lead to immediate punishment. And yet, his mind wandered, calculating small ways to preserve energy and maintain agency within his constrained body. The task demanded both physical power and careful attention. Tangled vines and thick roots resisted his every effort, forcing him to engage every muscle while keeping his expression composed. Sweat dripped down his short-cropped hair, along his sharp face, and onto the dust-covered earth. Even in chains, he carried himself with a latent power, muscles coiled and ready, eyes alert for the slightest hint of danger from the overseers or the natural hazards of the plantation. By mid-morning, a sudden shout broke the monotony. One of the overseers had spotted a gap in the workers' alignment and ordered Pata Seca to retrieve a fallen tool from the far side of the field. He moved swiftly, chains clinking, body tense and coiled like a spring. Short hair plastered to his scalp, his sharp eyes scanning constantly. He navigated the dusty terrain with a careful blend of speed and control. The weight of the chains did not slow him. It reminded him of every boundary, every rule imposed by those who sought to dominate. As he returned, he noticed a small moment of shared glance with another enslaved man, a fleeting recognition of resilience and survival. Pata Seca's sharp features softened briefly in acknowledgement, a silent camaraderie forged under oppression. Yet there was no room for indulgence. The overseer's gaze was ever present, Waiting to punish any lapse in diligence or obedience. By afternoon, the sun scorched the fields relentlessly. Pata Seca's sweat-soaked skin glistened, muscles taut with exhaustion yet refusing to give in. His task now shifted to carrying water to the farthest reaches of the plantation, each bucket heavy and cumbersome. Chains clanged with every movement, a metallic rhythm that accompanied the laborious beat of his heart. His short-cropped hair clung to his head, sharp face tight with tension, eyes focused on each careful step. Survival demanded unbroken attention. His mind worked tirelessly to anticipate every potential hazard. Later, he was summoned once again to the central compound, where the most invasive duties awaited. He obeyed without hesitation, muscles flexed, eyes sharp and alert, chains jingling as he moved. Every step was a negotiation between obedience and private defiance, a careful assertion of the control he could still maintain over his own body and mind. Though dehumanized, Pata Seca retained an inner vigilance, a quiet power that could not be stripped away. Evening brought a brief respite as shadows stretched across the dusty fields. Pata Seca paused, chains heavy at his wrists, muscles trembling but still taut. He observed the plantation with keen eyes, noting the positions of overseers, the movements of fellow workers, and the faint patches of cover where one could momentarily rest without being seen. His short-cropped hair reflected the fading sunlight, sharp features softened only by exhaustion. Though the day had been punishing, he had endured. Night settled with a cool hush. Pata Seca lay upon coarse straw, chains loosely looped around his wrists, body coated in dust and sweat. Eyes sharp, he observed the moonlight filtering through the hut, illuminating the powerful lines of his muscles and the tension still etched across his face. Sleep was fragmented, but within it, he nurtured a quiet defiance, the certainty that survival itself was an act of rebellion. The plantation could dominate his body, dictate his movements, and strip him of liberty. Yet his mind, his resolve, remained intact. And so, beneath the stars, Pata Seca rested with vigilance, the chains a constant reminder of oppression, yet also a testament to the hidden strength within. Each day was a challenge, each task an assertion of endurance, and each breath a quiet act of defiance in a world designed to strip him of both. The day began with an oppressive silence, the early light barely cutting through the haze of dust and smoke that hovered over the plantation. Pata Seca stirred from his uneasy rest, chains clinking softly as he stretched, each muscle taut and coiled with tension. Short hair clung to his scalp, eyes sharp and calculating, scanning the dim outlines of the huts. Though the morning offered no respite, he moved with a quiet vigilance. Anticipating the day's relentless demands, his first task was repairing the irrigation sluices that had been damaged during a sudden storm the night before. The work required lifting heavy logs and arranging stones with precision, chains biting into his wrists with every motion. His sharp face reflected not only the strain of exertion, but also a silent determination. While the overseers controlled his body, they could not command his mind. He worked steadily, muscles flexing under the pressure, aware that every slip could provoke punishment. That mid-morning brought a momentary distraction. A young boy had stumbled while carrying water. Pata Seca's eyes darted toward the incident. With swift, careful movements, he assisted the boy, lifting the bucket and steadying him without drawing the attention of the overseers. The brief exchange, subtle and unnoticed, offered a flicker of human connection in a world dominated by chains and cruelty. It reminded him that strength was not only physical, but also the ability to preserve dignity and humanity in others. By noon, the sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across the field. Pata Seca's sweat-soaked torso glistened in the harsh light, muscles taut and coiled. He was ordered to transport bundles of reeds to a distant storage shed, each movement painstaking and precise. Chains rattled with each lift, a constant metallic reminder of captivity. His short hair was plastered to his head, eyes scanning constantly, facial expression tense and vigilant. Every step was a negotiation between obedience and the subtle assertion of self, a quiet defiance hidden within motion. Afternoon tasks shifted to the northern field, where thorny shrubs threatened to damage the crops. Pata Seca maneuvered among the undergrowth, his body flexing with strength and care. Chains bound his wrists, but he used leverage and technique to accomplish the work efficiently. The overseer's shadows loomed large, their presence a constant threat, yet he maintained a rhythm, a precise combination of exertion and control, proving that endurance could be a quiet rebellion. Later, he was called to the central compound for a particularly degrading assignment, one that tested both endurance and willpower. Muscles tense and taut, eyes sharp and alert, he complied, moving with grim precision. Even in acts designed to subjugate him, he retained a sense of agency. Timing, posture, and attention to detail became tools for survival. Subtle ways to assert control over a body that was not entirely free. As evening fell, a rare calm descended on the plantation. Pata Seca paused to rest under a sparse tree, chains heavy on wrists, sweat and dust coating his muscular frame. Short hair glistened in the dying light, sharp features softened slightly by exhaustion. He observed the horizon carefully, noting the positions of guards and the faint movements of fellow slaves, always alert, always planning. Though physically constrained, his mind remained agile, plotting the quiet acts of resistance that defined his survival. Night brought the hushed whispers of the enslaved workers and the occasional rattle of chains in the moonlight. Pata Seca lay on coarse straw, chains looped but not fully restraining him, eyes sharp and calculating. The moonlight highlighted every line of his muscular body, the tension in his limbs, and the resolute expression on his face. He allowed himself a moment to envision a life beyond the plantation, not as indulgent fantasy but as a strategy of hope, a spark to sustain the spirit against the relentless oppression of the day. Even in darkness, he endured. Each motion, each exertion, each fleeting moment of human connection was an assertion of resilience. The overseers could dictate his labor, but they could not command his will. Chains and cruelty might dominate the body, but the mind, sharp and vigilant, remained his own. Pata Seca lay beneath the silent stars, breathing deeply, carrying within him a hidden strength that no whip or shackle could ever extinguish. The night was unusually quiet, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a dog or the rattling of chains. Pata Seca lay awake on coarse straw, chains looped loosely around his wrists, eyes scanning the dim corners of the hut. Short-cropped hair stuck to his head with sweat, and every muscle in his powerful frame remained taut. The oppressive silence weighed heavily, yet it offered a rare opportunity. For the first time, he could plan without the immediate eyes of overseers upon him. Earlier that evening, he had witnessed something that stirred both fear and defiance. A guard had violently struck another enslaved man for a minor infraction. The scene played over in Pata Seca's mind, sharp features tight with tension, eyes glinting in the lantern's weak glow. Rage and horror mingled with a strategic calculation. There was no room for overt rebellion yet, but he could sow small acts of resistance, protect the weaker ones, and preserve fragments of dignity where he could dot as he shifted slightly. Chains clinking, he heard a whisper from across the room. Another enslaved man, trembling and thin, had noticed his alertness and courage. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding passed between them. In that moment, Pata Seca's sharp face softened just enough to convey a promise. Survival, vigilance, and defiance would be shared. Even if the world tried to strip it all away. Outside, moonlight spilled across the plantation, highlighting the silhouettes of the overseer's compound. Pata Seca studied the shadows carefully. He noticed weak points in the patrol pattern, small gaps where a silent movement could go unnoticed. Though chains bound his body, his mind remained unshackled. He imagined slipping from one shadow to another, observing, learning, and quietly undermining the oppressor's control. Each plan, each calculation, was a spark in the darkness, a defiance that could not be chained. Suddenly, a noise from the outer fence drew his attention. Pata Seca rose carefully, chains rattling softly. A rat scurried across the ground, and he suppressed a sharp breath of relief. The adrenaline coursing through him reminded him that every small motion, every cautious glance, was a lifeline. His muscular frame, tense and coiled, remained ready, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Later, he moved to the corner of the hut where a small, hidden space allowed for brief privacy. Here, he could tend to minor injuries unnoticed, rub raw skin from chains, and regain a fragment of comfort. The sharp line of his jaw softened under concentration, eyes focused, hands moving deliberately. Though confined, these small acts were victories, moments of self-preservation, moments of reclaiming bodily autonomy within the oppressive system. The night deepened, and Pata Seca allowed himself to think of the impossible freedom, not as a grand escape which would invite death, but as an eventual reality that could be approached through patient observation and careful action. Every chain, every lash, every enforced labor task had taught him something about the weaknesses and patterns of those who believed themselves invincible. His body remained bound, but his mind plotted and endured, coiled like a spring ready for the right moment. Finally, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Pata Seca lay back on the straw, chains cold against his wrists, face sharp yet contemplative. He knew the day ahead would bring renewed toil, cruelty, and oversight. Yet in the quiet moments before the sun rose fully, he felt the weight of possibility, the spark of resistance, small yet undeniable, flickering in his chest. Survival had become more than endurance. It was strategy, observation, and a quiet, unbroken defiance that no overseer could take from him. The first light of dawn painted the plantation in pale gold, but Pata Seca hardly noticed the beauty. His mind was alive with urgency, each nerve taut as chains rattled softly around his wrists. The previous nights of observation, calculation, and quiet defiance had led to this moment. Short-cropped hair damp with sweat, sharp facial features tight with focus, and muscles coiled under the weight of captivity. He felt the simmering strength of years of endurance. This morning, the overseers were unusually restless, giving harsh orders and moving through the fields with greater scrutiny. Pata Seca moved among the other enslaved men with precision, each step deliberate, each glance careful. Though his body remained bound, his mind operated freely, plotting minute acts of resistance. Today, he would test the boundaries not recklessly, but strategically. Every motion was measured, every decision weighed with the potential consequences in mind. Mid-morning, a confrontation erupted. A younger enslaved man had dropped a heavy load, and a guard approached with whip raised. Pata Seca's eyes locked on the scene. With a sudden burst of controlled movement, he interposed himself, muscles flexed, short hair slicked back, chains clinking with restrained energy. His sharp gaze met the overseer's with a firmness that surprised even himself, though no one could physically overpower the guard at this moment. The sheer intensity of Pata Seca's presence, the taut strength in his frame, and the defiance in his eyes created a pause, a subtle assertion of human dignity in a world designed to strip it away. Later, he found a fleeting moment of privacy in the shadowed corner of the central compound. Chains dangled, wrists raw, yet he used the stillness to reflect and plan. For years, his body had been captive, his strength monitored and constrained, but his mind had remained untethered. He traced the faint patterns of guard patrols, mapped weak points in their routines, and rehearsed subtle, non-lethal forms of resistant silent signals, repositioning objects, aiding fellow enslaved men without attracting attention. Each small plan was a flicker of freedom, an assertion of control over at least a fragment of his life. By afternoon, The sun struck relentlessly, yet Pata Seca's awareness did not waver. The overseers were distracted momentarily by routine quarrels among themselves. He used the brief window to communicate silently with another enslaved man, a signal to move an important object away from a vulnerable position, preventing punishment and subtly undermining authority. The tension in his coiled muscles and the sharp determination in his short-cropped hair and angular face spoke volumes, though chained. His will remained unbroken. Evening approached, bringing long shadows across the dusty fields. Pata Seca paused atop a small rise, chains clinking softly, muscles taut but controlled, sharp eyes scanning the horizon. In that moment, he allowed himself a fleeting, private victory. He had survived the day, defended others where possible, and asserted small dominion over circumstances designed to crush him. The chains bit. The overseer's presence was oppressive, yet internally he was free in observation, free in thought, free in the quiet acts of rebellion that no whip could touch. As night fell, the final moments were contemplative rather than frantic. Pata Seca lay on coarse straw, chains looped loosely, eyes reflecting the dim lantern light, sharp face tense but contemplative. For the first time in years, he acknowledged the power he had retained despite the captivity. Endurance, observation, strategy, empathy, and the quiet assertion of self in an environment that sought to erase him. These were the true chains he had broken, the chains on his mind, the ones that no overseer could ever impose. Under the quiet stars, Pata Seca closed his eyes briefly, imagining the horizon beyond the plantation. The faintest glimmer of freedom shimmering in the distance. The world had not changed, the chains remained, and the task of survival continued, but his spirit had claimed victory. Each day endured, each subtle act of defiance, each protective gesture toward others had forged a strength that was unbreakable. And as he exhaled, muscles coiled and tense, face sharp yet composed, he understood. He had broken the chains within, and nothing could take that from him.